Welcome to ANN In Depth. Today, we are going to talk about young people and how young people can have an encounter with Jesus and become active members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I am joined by amazing guests. We'll start with Gary Blanchard, who is a pastor. He is the youth director for the Seventh-day Adventist World Church. And I'm very excited to invite Kevin Wilson to be with us today. Kevin is a pastor in San Diego, California. I think that I got that right. And he will tell us all about that in a moment. But he has been covered over and over with the story of the king of TikTok, or at least the king of chai on TikTok. And we're going to talk about chai tea, and we're going to talk about the gospel. And so that's what we have today. Now, let's get started with our main concept that we will be grappling with in today's episode of ANN In Depth. And this is it. If somebody could bring it to the screen at the bottom, this is what it says. To increase accession, retention, reclamation, and participation of children, youth, and young adults. This is one of the key objectives of the Seventh-day Adventist World Church for the next, 4 or 5 years. It seems to me, and I'll start with you, Gary. It seems to me that ever since there were old people, they dreamed of the day when the young would take over the church and would do something. And this is a constant progression, generation after generation. So how do you see this? Because you've been traveling the world leading youth ministries. Is that something that happens everywhere? What can we do to actually make it happen?
Yeah, one of the things we could stop doing is saying that the youth are the church of today. We tend to do that quite often, which tells the young people that they're now responsible for everything, whether or not they've had the training and the furnishing of the older generation. It also tells the older generation that, hey, we don't need you anymore. Get out of the way. So I think there's this subliminal message that's going around that only the youth are the church of today. And we need to remind the older generation that you are desperately needed to mentor and lead the younger generation. They need to have your support and love and warmth, your guidance and your mentorship desperately. The church is made up of young and old, and this message needs to be very, very clear. We need each other. With such an army of workers as our youth, rightly trained. Well, who's going to rightly train them? We need all generations, Sam. That's a really, really good question.
Okay, Gary, let me find out more about you, and then I will do the same with Kevin, because you are serving as the World Youth Director. Only God knows what you're going to be doing in 10 years. Maybe the same, maybe something else. Right. But it might have something to do with young people. So where did that come from? Why is it that you've got this passion and energy? And where in your story did you start focusing on youth ministry?
For many years, I ran away from the calling God had placed on my heart to be a minister. Not everybody's called to be full-time ministry in the church, but we're all really called to full-time ministry. But I was called, and I ran from that call for a long time. But finally, around my junior year at Southern University, I sat down with Derek Morris, who was my advisor, and I made a decision to follow that calling God had placed on my heart. And that's where it started. I got to say to you, Sam, we really don't know where God will place us when we make ourselves available to him in ministry. But it seems that over and over again, God placed me in youth ministry wherever I went. Even when I was a district pastor, I was always in charge of something that had to do with youth. But God tracked my life in that way, and I'm very grateful to him for it. I love working with youth and young adults.
Well, Kevin, same question. I'm really excited to talk to you today. I've been following your TikTok for a while, and it was a surprise to me when I saw that you were on the guest list for today. Members of my team are saying, you've got to try this out. And they share on WhatsApp how they're trying to do this chai here and do the spices. And then you have a little formula that you follow and you comment when other people are. It's phenomenal. So before we get to your love of chai, let's talk about ministry, because you're a pastor and God called you at some point. And tell us more about that story of where that came from.
Yeah, I was born in Sri Lanka and I lived there till I was about 12 years old. And then I moved to the Middle East. I lived in Oman for a little bit because my parents moved there for employment purposes. And I grew up in a Seventh-day Adventist home. And when I was a kid, my church kept telling me, I think you'd be a good speaker, you'd be a good pastor, but I didn't think too much about it. This is a whole story for another day, but I got the green card through a lottery, came to the States, and I was at the age of 18, came to America, 2 suitcases and a backpack, and was trying to figure out what to do for school. And I really wanted to be a pilot. That's what I wanted to do from the time I was 12 years old. And so I applied to all the flight schools. I got rejected by all of them. And in the moment of sheer desperation, I just asked God. I was like, God, like people kept telling me that I'd be a good pastor. So if you wanted me to be a pastor, then pay my way through school. At the time, this was back in 2008, I thought that Andrews University was the only Adventist institution in North America, and because of the impact of 3ABN, I grew up watching 3ABN. It was the only window into Adventism outside of my immediate culture, and so I said I'm going to go to Andrews. And again, to make the long story short, got into Andrews, and I think the call kind of grew. It grew over time as a freshman, as a sophomore, and then come my junior year, I actually went through a crisis in belief, and I chose to give up my faith completely while I was a theology student. And over a series of interactions with friends and of a lot of searching and going back to the truths, the beliefs, the evidences for Jesus, I went through all of that stuff, and I told God, I'm not going to turn back, and let's just keep going. And it's been a wonderful adventure ever since then, and the rest was history.
Wow. Kevin, and then how long have you been in the church where you are now? Tell me more about the church, the name, where it is, and some characteristics of it.
Right. So I am at the Oceanside Seventh-day Adventist Church here in sunny San Diego. And I started here about 3 years ago in August 2017. And my official job description is that I'm a youth and young adult pastor, an associate pastor. And this church has been here for a while now, and it's just a privilege to work with my senior pastor too. It's not every day you see a senior pastor in the same local church for the last 30 years, and so he's been here for 30 years, and a really good mentor, a great community, very multicultural community, and it's been a blessing.
And where does TikTok come in to that journey?
Yeah, so this was about six months ago. I mean, all the stuff that's happened is very recent. Around January, I just got the app just to see what my youth were up to, and what started off as a joke eventually turned out to be something crazy. Well, to backtrack a little bit, I've been making chai from the time I was a kid. This is a part of my culture growing up, and so I decided to make it, share it on Instagram. And then I made a video with a voiceover over it, and I decided to post it on TikTok. Nothing happened for a couple of days, but then a week later, the video just took off, and it went viral. And within a matter of a month, I went from 200 followers to about 20,000 on TikTok. And I started to realize, okay, something is clicking, and I just kept posting more videos, but the videos are not just about recipes. I try to touch on things a little bit more than the actual chai content. So I talk about things like racism. I talk about things like being kind and caring to one another. So I want to touch on meaning as well through my content, and so I suppose it struck a nerve with a lot of my followers, who are mostly non-Christians and atheists. Actually, that's just the majority of my followership, and so it's been a wonderful journey so far.
Let me open up here a page so that there are some people watching this who never heard of TikTok. Where have you been is really the question that needs to be asked. Welcome back among us. Let me see if I can find that application window here. So here's your channel. Let's see if it shows. Yep, there it is. And this is you. Behold, the chai affogato. And it's really funny. And you react to other people who are making chai tea in their own homes. And it's a very real experience. This is a reaction video of somebody that was doing chai, and you talk about their TikTok, about your process for making chai tea, and it's fantastic. We have 2 million likes and 124,000 followers.
Wow.
And it's important to note that it's not a fad. It's not something that you decided, you know what, I'm going to focus on this and I want to be famous for this. And I want to talk about, kindness and what I believe through chai tea. It's not something that you set out to do that. But once you brought out to the world something that was meaningful to you, it became meaningful to others. Tell me more about the discovery process, because this surprised you as it surprised, you mentioned, how did this happen? I don't know. I just put this thing and then it happened. So tell us more about that.
Yeah. So, it started off, like I said, as just a fun little experiment. And what was really interesting to me is just the feedback that I've been receiving. And so much of the feedback was, they were kind of around sentiments of, this is very positive content. We need more of this stuff. And I think it's also one of the reasons the whole thing blew up is because during this pandemic, everybody was stuck at home and they were quarantining and they were trying to figure out, okay, like, is there anything that we can do in our free time? And so I think that's a part of the reason why this thing blew up as well. But the reason why I kept continuing to do that was because the channel eventually became a source of comfort and a source of encouragement to a lot of different people. So the first wave of my channel going crazy was my first few videos, but then it picked up even more steam and I started to use the duet feature. Now the duet feature, if you saw the screen that Sam shared before, was when you have your video next to another video and you're reacting to the other video. And more often than not, the duet feature is used to either disparage somebody or criticize somebody, and the outrage actually gets a lot of views. So I decided to, let me just critique and just coach somebody doing their chai. And what I did not anticipate is how a lot of people saw that short interaction, even if it was just a few under a minute, as something that they craved for themselves. Maybe an encouraging word from somebody. Maybe it reminded them of what they didn't have growing up. And so over time, the channel the brand actually became something that stood for positivity, something that stood for meaning, meaningful interactions between humans, especially in an age of outrage and animosity. And so I decided to just do more of that content. And what's interesting is that what people don't see behind the scenes is a lot of the direct messages that I get on my Instagram and in my TikTok about people who have either left the church or who have had questions about Christianity, and they now see me as some sort of a spiritual figure or a pastor that they can trust and they can ask these questions. So just a couple of weeks ago, a month ago, I had, for example, a conversation with a Hindu guy who got on Zoom, and we were talking about Hinduism and Adventism, and we were having a good chat. So I can tell you so many stories about all these different interactions that I've had over the past few weeks and months, and it's been wonderful.
I've seen hundreds of people, if not thousands, who are connecting with you publicly, and they mention much of what you just said on the chats of each of these videos, and they want it seems a relationship, a friendship, a connection, and there is this whole community that emerges within a single video about what things mean and so on, and it's mostly positive. It's incredibly positive. How do you manage so many relationships that people are, because it can get quite daunting. The average video would have hundreds. So how do you read it all? How do you do that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Initially, I had about few people, maybe 20, 30 people every day commenting and interacting with my post. And now it's in the hundreds and sometimes, in the 300s, 400s every day. So you're right. There's no way that I can meaningfully interact with every single person who comments on my page. But I like to have this focus when I'm interacting with people. One thing that I've learned through this interaction is to see that every single human being is and has a story, and that every single person is made in the image of God, which means that no matter what they believe, no matter how they express themselves, no matter how they express their identities and their beliefs, everyone has something that's so sacred, and that's their story. And so I like to have that kind of mindset as I approach and interact with people. So my knee-jerk reaction is not, oh, I'm an Adventist, you're not Adventist, let me convert you, let me get you to the truth. It's more so, wow, thank you so much for taking the time to engage with me. I really appreciate what you shared. And so that's my starting point as I interact with people. And over time, that's allowed me to kind of be, God has, formed this wonderful community of just eclectic individuals. And so a lot of people are even surprised. They're like, oh, you're a pastor, you're a Christian. And so that is both surprising, but also saddening and disheartening at the same time. And hopefully we can get into some of that conversation today. So yeah, that's just the short end of it.
Gary, let me come to you now, and you have a lot of interaction on social media with a lot of young people, and I want to talk to you about a interesting question in regards to young people not engaging with the church as much, or not connecting with the church as much. With YouTube, especially YouTube, we are now on YouTube right now. This is where we are. We have access to incredible content way beyond our locale, way beyond our town, our village, our little part of the world. Kevin was talking about the only connection with Adventism that he had was through 3ABN. There are some people that had that in the past, but that's certainly not the case now. The average person will listen to many sermons a week from everywhere. So the idea that a local community where you have maybe a local pastor whose gift is not in preaching, let's take that for a moment, and now, or maybe a lay person who does their best, who to share the word of God on a Sabbath morning, and now you have young people who are listening, but it's not feeding them, it's not speaking their language, it's not connecting with them. And 30 years ago, the only option was, well, shut up and listen, because there's nothing else that you're going to get. Well, now there is plenty more that you can get, even when there is no lockdown. Now, with the lockdown, the whole thing goes crazy. So how do you see this, this idea of both we can access the best preachers, the best spiritual content from everyone, but we can access spiritual content from everyone? And a young person does not leave the Adventist church. They leave their local church. They belong to that local church. What are your views on all this?
Well, I first just want to say how I want to affirm Kevin, Pastor Kevin. I really appreciate what we're hearing from him. He defines what I believe as a digital missionary. I mean, he is out there reaching and speaking a positive message into the division that we're having in our world today. Man, Kevin, my hat's off to you. I'll be a follower here real soon. As soon as we get off of this interview, I'll check out what you're doing. But the idea that finally somebody, with all the political shouting back and forth, here's somebody that steps up and with a calm spirit and a good spirit speaks into the needs of the situation in a positive way. I think that's great. We are in desperate need of digital missionaries, and young people are being called out now. Our best and our brightest, innovative people are our young people. And we're finding right now, Sam, that now local churches that paid no attention to social media before are suddenly faced with the reality of, you better or you're going to die. It's a march of death if you're not involved in technology right now. You've got to, even if it means putting your cell phone up on a tripod and streaming it right there in your church. If that's all you got, that's wonderful. But here's what our churches need to realize is that you have an army of young people in your sanctuary, or at least connected with your church, that can help you in that direction. So with all these things that are happening around the world, Sam, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question here, but with all the things happening in the world today, God is calling for digital missionaries like Pastor Kevin to step up, help their local church, get involved in their own way in speaking a positive message into the situation of our world today. I'm not saying they can't be theological, they can't have prophetic messages. We need to have those as well. But I love the approach of speaking into a very hot topic right now that's been very divisive in a good spirit, like Pastor Kevin has chosen to do, and God is apparently really blessing him to reach even those who have no connection with God at all. So this is a clarion call to young people around the world to step up and be digital missionaries.
Yeah, I think it's I believe 100% in this call for digital missions. We have an important project that helps with that. Are you saying then, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I need you to clarify, that instead of just waiting to be fed by the shepherd of a local community, that's why the name pastor comes from, that we need young people to become also the preachers, and we need them to actually start feeding rather than just feeding others, rather than just keeping their mouths like little birds, just waiting to be fed again and again and again, more worms from the grown-ups.
Yeah.
Tell me more if that's what you mean, and if not, then tell me, what exactly do you mean when it comes to that nurturing process?
Boy, Sam, I would say absolutely, you're correct. If there was ever a church that should believe that we don't need to be pastor dependent, we need to be Christ dependent and his word dependent. If there was ever a church like that, it's the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We were not built on, initially as our movement, we were a church that was dependent upon the gifts of the laity. The lay people stepped up and they did ministry, and our church moved very, very quickly forward as a result of that. So no, obviously the pastors can't do all the work. They desperately need the help of young people, especially now with this technological frontier that's opening for us. We hear it in books like Faith of Exiles, where the writer David Kinnaman describes this world as digital Babylon, and that we desperately need to get out there with our message into digital Babylon in much the same way that Pastor Kevin is doing it. It's very exciting, Sam.
If I can speak to that just a little bit, thank you, Gary, for sharing that, even, and Sam. I think while we're expecting young people to step up and have agency and empowerment, I think that is inextricably connected to mentorship and discipleship within your local context. Because it's one thing to expect young people to show up and do these things, whether they get on TikTok or Instagram or whatever they do. But unless they feel that they are accepted, unless they feel that they are empowered, unless they feel that the church understands them, then it's going to be an uphill battle. Because I'll tell you what, I'm a youth pastor here, and in my short experience, and this is just my little slice of reality from where I'm at, I've come to understand that the people who step up to the plate, the young people who step up to the plate, at least in my church context, are the ones who have had a long, actually a complex network of authentic relationships within the church, and also that the pastor really supported them. So, and even when they are doing certain things, we have to continue to mentor them. And I went on Twitter a couple of days ago, and I just kind of posed this question. I said, I'm gonna go on the GC here and talk to these wonderful people about like why young people are leaving the church. And the comments kept coming, and one of the things that kept coming up was the lack of mentorship and the lack of accountability within many of our churches. In the Great Commission, starts with go make disciples, baptizing them, and then teach. But more often than not, that whole thing is reversed in many contexts. Most of us tend to teach, then baptize, and then perhaps we can make disciples. And many churches expect people to behave rightly, then believe rightly, so that they can now belong to a community. But then, Jesus kind of flipped that switch too. He said, "Hey, come, you belong. Let's just figure this thing out." And then he taught them things that they could believe, and on the basis of belonging and behavior, believing, they can now behave through the help of the Holy Spirit. So we need to do a better job, I think, in many church contexts of actually empowering young people.
Ooh, hey, Sam, can I jump in on that?
Go for it.
Kevin's getting me fired up here. He's right on the money. In fact, the Bible promises just before Jesus returns that God will raise up the prophet Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers. There's a prophecy in there that there'll be a movement of youth leaders at the end of time. In fact, Elijah was one of the greatest youth pastors in the entire Bible. Not only did he care for young people when he stretched himself over that young boy and prayed that life would come back into him, he challenged young people. He challenged them to stop being wishy-washy in your faith, make a decision for God. And finally, he called young people. Remember, he threw that mantle over Elisha and mentored him. So what Pastor Kevin is saying is absolutely right. We cannot dump leadership on young people. We need to pass it on in much the same way that Elijah did it. And God predicts that God will raise up leaders like that, like Elijah in the very last days, who will do that. And they'll care for young people, they'll challenge young people, and they will definitely call young people into ministry and mentor them through that process. So it's desperately needed today. He's right on.
There is a Bible passage which was never quoted throughout all of my studies, but I discovered it actually not too long ago. And it's a really, I think, very important passage for this particular subject. And I'll share it with you. It's found in Numbers chapter 8. I'll share it on the screen. This is what it says. The Lord said to Moses, keyword, Lord said to Moses. This applies to the Levites. Men 25 years old or more shall come to take part in the work of the tent of meeting. So priests. But at the age of 50, they must retire from their regular service and work no longer. They must assist their brothers in performing their duties at the tent of meeting, but they themselves must not do the work. This then is how you are to assign the responsibilities to the Levites. Now, this is a very serious passage because it embeds the process of mentorship within the priesthood. How do you see this as if not the exact ages, but how do you see this as a mandate, and how can we practically do it? Kevin, let me start with you.
Yeah, so I think to be quite, if I can be candid, I think one of the ways to do that is to revisit where we have spent our funds and resources on, at the local church level, at the institutional level, at the division level. And the distrust and the misallocation of resources tends to be a serious wedge between young people and their commitment to the church. They see, like right now, we have 20, 30 years old people who are running entire corporations in the business world. But it's interesting as to how we spend countless meetings and committees and board meetings trying to figure out if we can allocate a $500 budget to somebody who's a young person who wants to lead an initiative. Not just them, but alongside with the church. So I think that, so the allocation of funds is definitely a big thing. But also,
let me just clarify to see exactly what you mean here, because I think it matters very much. I was a youth pastor a few years ago, and we were in one of those meetings, right? So we asked this young person to lead a particular project, and he was a senior executive at a company. But we were struggling whether to give him 5,000 pounds. I was in England, 5,000 pounds or not. And I shared that with him. I said, I don't understand the difficulty. I mean, we've what's the matter here? And he goes, Pastor Sam, you've just arrived. I manage a budget of over $2 million a year. That's the trust that I get at work. But my church struggles for months to give me 5,000. What am I to make of that? Is that what you mean by the allocation of resources and the responsibilities that are given? Or do you mean that the church invests its funds in things that it perhaps is not bringing the results that it wants? What exactly do you mean by that?
I think it means a little bit of both, to be honest. I think mainly, for sure, I'm thinking about actually reconsidering how we allocate our funds at the local church level, and not just how we allocate the funds, but also who are we allocating to. But also revisiting and doing an inventory of the things and the programs that we have invested money in to figure out, okay, are they really producing the results that we are getting? I remember this quote. I can't remember who said this, but he said, she or he said that your system is perfectly designed to get the results, it gets.
that you're getting.
Right? So
That's right.
so if you're getting a certain number of results, if you're not getting those results, then go back to your system, go back. And more often than not, it seems to be that there is a hemorrhage, not just in terms of finances, but also in terms of trust within our systems, our relational networks within our churches, that's preventing young people from leading.
Gary.
Wow, that's great. It's true. We know our people are very generous. They give. We usually have, many of our churches have a school that they're trying to fund as well. They're putting lots of resources into those things. Many of them are dealing with building projects, so expenses can go. But here's to his point, which is right on the money. The solution, Sam, is very simply the church manual. And let me tell you why. Because in the church manual, it designates several youth leaders that are supposed to be sitting on our church boards.
Tell me more. This is gold for pastors here.
Pastors, listen, I mean, and you, leaders, listen to me very carefully. In the church manual, there are several leaders that are supposed to be sitting on your church boards. There's the Pathfinder director, there's the AY director. You've got key individuals that are supposed to be on that board. And let me tell you something, if the more of these youth advocates that you have on that board, the easier it's going to be to raise funds for these events and programs to retain and reach the next generation that Pastor Kevin is talking about. So I know this is going to sound really old of me to say, but we need to start reading the church manual and applying it, especially in our leadership councils.
That's excellent. My father was a lawyer, and he always told me, you need to memorize that church manual because it's your guide and it's your way to lead it. So here's another example, which is what you're bringing up. Let me now flip the coin here. And say that no one asked the pioneers, who were mostly young, to do what they did. They took responsibility for something and they do it. And I see this every local church. There are young people who take responsibility for it. They're not the little chicks just waiting for the next worm to come. They go out and they do what they need to do. And part of that problem, and I had that problem, is that leadership normally does not understand what changes need to be made so that new results come. As Kevin was saying, your system is perfectly designed so that you get what you're getting. And young people come in and say, I know how to make that better. And usually they don't have the patience to help the current leadership to understand or to get it. And all my life, I used to have some resentment for church leadership. And this is not just the pastor, because I was the pastor. This is with my conference president. This is with the church leadership. And I would pray, dear Lord, why do you put people in charge who have no idea what is needed in the 21st century to fulfill this mission? Why? What's wrong? And I used to have this feeling in my heart. And then I had a fantastic mentor in my life who helped me to understand that people get it when they get it and not a moment sooner. And so it's now my responsibility to help them get it. So the global Seventh-day Adventist Church is investing in digital evangelism like never before. It's a priority for our administration of the General Conference. And within the church structure, the wider the territory, the older people get. Okay, so I discovered that when I arrived at the General Conference, I was very young. I did not know that I was young, but I was told that I was young constantly. So, Sam, you're young. You know this. Now, when the average age is in their 90s, yes, I am young. It's not in their 90s. It's much lower than that. But I'm just joking. Gary, you are the youngest director, I think, in the General Conference, and there was a lot of conversations before you arrived about, is he too young to be a director here, and so on. And so there are movements in the right direction. But the only reason why the church is investing in digital is that we have been helping the leadership understand just how important that is. And it took years, taking them to different events, taking them to different opportunities to experience it. Once they understand it, then they follow it. What would happen if we had that kind of mentorship that will allow young people to have patience and to also help the older leadership to understand what really matters? Because I don't think there is malevolence. Do you think there is malevolence? Do you think there are people that are saying, no one is going to take me away from the power that I have in this church board. Usually nobody likes going to church board because it's an exercise in Jericho. You go round and round, but you never quite blow the trumpet. It's just discussions forever. No one likes church boards, not even the grown-ups that are part of it. What do you think would happen if we were to help them with patience and some wisdom on how they can mentor the older generations? Any one of you?
Go ahead, Kevin.
No, it's yeah. I think the question also must be, so the question was like, how can we get the young people to maybe have a little bit more patience with the older generation? Is that
and to mentor the older generation, because that mentorship has to do with knowledge too.
Sure.
Yeah. Right. So there is that younger people need to mentor the old, because they are not aware of what's new.
It's definitely like a mutual reciprocal process between the young people and the old people, and especially right now, this Generation Z, there seems to kind of be like there's this tendency of young people to just like, let's just go, let's just do this thing, and not wait for what's going on. But but I'm also saying this as like a very, very, like I'm probably making a generalization as well, because the thing is, I think both young people and the older ones need to understand each other well, and it seems that not in order for mutual mentoring to take place, there should be also a mutual willingness to really, really listen and empathize with the other person's perspective. So young people have to really understand the systems, the culture, the past, the stories of their predecessors. But then old people also have to understand that young people also have heart, energy, passion, and also just amazing innovation, creative abilities for them to do that. So in order for this to happen, though, there needs to be some give and take, and you can't force that. And I think people need to play the long game. And that's where things get really messy. But that long game is definitely vital in order for things to happen.
I'd like to piggyback on what he's saying, Sam. The millennials need to realize that they're now the old folks. They are now the old folks, because you have the Generation Z coming after them, right? Yeah. And Generation Z needs to realize that they're becoming the old folks very quickly too, because you have Generation Alpha coming behind them. So we need to realize that we are the older generation, and we need to have respect for the generation that came before us, because we need to learn from them, because now we're the older generation responsible for mentoring those coming behind us. So I think this can really help us to be empathetic and sympathetic. We can learn from those ahead of us. We can learn from their failures. We can learn from their successes. But we need to remember that we are the older generation, and we have a responsibility for those who come before us, even if you're Generation Z, even if you're millennials, especially, So I just want to affirm that tenderness toward each other, regardless of the generation, learning from one another, our strengths and weaknesses. Sam, I love what Spirit of Prophecy, and I'm speaking mainly about the book Patriarchs and Prophets by the author Ellen White. She talks about the relationship between Elijah and Elisha. And she says that Elisha became a greater prophet than Elijah because he was humble enough to learn from his strengths and learn from his weaknesses. And this is what made him a great prophet as a result of that. So we need to have that respect that Kevin is talking about there toward the older generation, and understanding to be able to work with them.
I do also want to quickly mention that, recent research in Barna conducted on Generation Z, and these are kids born between, I think, the years of 96 and 2014, I believe. That's the age group. One of the common misconceptions is that as a whole, this generation is, they don't like the older generation, or they just want to do their own thing all the time. Well, it turns out that according to at least Barna, most of the young people actually look up to, there's a significant amount of Christian Gen Zs who actually look up to their parents as role models. Mm-hmm. And they're actually bypassing some of the millennials and looking up to their parents, because when they look at their parents, they see images of success, financial stability, and a home and all these different things that they have. And so most of these Gen Z people, they actually want it. They want that. They want the success. And so I just also want to demystify this notion that all young people are impatient. What's the word I'm looking for? They just want to do their own thing all the time. I think deep down there is this willingness to want to follow and model people who have gone before them, who have actually accomplished certain things in their lives.
Absolutely. And this is reflected in TikTok, because some of the very followed accounts have children and parents doing things together and so on. And you have somebody that sometimes the mother comes in and the father comes in, and sometimes, and so even on these new platforms, you have this connection between the two. I find that a lot of times language helps tremendously, just some tools in language. So if you're a pastor and you have, let's say, a 19-year-old that comes to you and says, "Hey, pastor, I've noticed that you really want to reach our community." That's your terminology. That's what you call it. But let me tell you something. There are new tools and there are new ways to do it, which I think we can be much more successful in. And I'd love to tell you about it and help you understand how to do that. Now, I don't know any pastor in their right mind who is not going to roll the red carpet and say, "I will give you as much time as you need." Most pastors today, even the really, really old ones, will know that the world has changed and would want to hear it. They might not necessarily do it, but they will at least want to hear it. On the other hand, you also have language that can be used by older generations. So if you have an elder in a local church, if you're not familiar with the structure of the Adventist church, each one of our local churches has a group of elders. They're not necessarily old, but they kind of are responsible for pastoral care and leadership within the church. And they work very closely with the pastor. So if you have an elder who's in their 60s, can you imagine if he comes to an 18-year-old who is interested in Jesus and the church and says, "I noticed there are new tools and new ways of doing things, and I really would like to understand it. Would you mind if we could spend some time together where I could really grasp what the possibilities are for what our church could do going forward?" You know, just that language alone creates the humility. It creates the setting. Now, of course, it has to be genuine. So, you know, that also matters. I just want to point out in this connection between young and old, before we change the subject, that there are 3 blue zones in the world. One is in Loma Linda, California, not far from San Diego. The other one is in Italy, and the other one is in Japan. Okay, so these blue zones, people live regularly beyond 100. And I've heard a lot of programs talking about their health habits as the reason why. So you have, you know, they do exercise, the sunshine and food and what they eat is healthy and wonderful and this, that, and the other. And I come from an Italian family. Now, let me tell you something. Italians can be wonderful at various things, but eating healthily is absolutely not one of them. So the people in Italy that live long lives, we have to grapple with the facts that they eat pork morning, afternoon, and evening. They cook in animal fat, pretty much everything they do. So their eating habits are terrible. They don't do that much exercise. And so what they eat is not very healthy. It seems to me that one of the main things that all of these 3 places have in common is a tremendous respect for the elderly. Tremendous respect for the elderly in Italy, in Japan, and in Loma Linda. And it seems that the research points in this direction, that when you have cross-generational lives that are lived, so if you're constantly exposed to people that are very old and young and so on, all with that profound mutual respect, you live longer. And there is a hormonal reason for this that I was reading. Serotonin, when you feel that you are respected, you produce serotonin. It's a wonderful hormone that regulates your mood and helps you to live healthier lives. Now, it strikes me that the commandments already predicted this and promised this. Honor your father and your mother so that your days on this earth are prolonged. You have this promise that if you honor the elderly, your days will be prolonged. And of course, their days too, which is impossible to imagine a group in the desert 3,000 years ago coming up with that alone if our science today is just about grappling with that reality. The church seems to be the last place where this could happen, where this full connection is happening. Do you see this happening, or are we just segregated just as much as society within our own churches?
Okay, I'll jump in on this. Something you said really resonated with me, and maybe Kevin, you want to pick up after this. But we often hear this, Sam. We often hear people say, "This church was started by young people," right? And we have all the lists of the young people that were part of this church, and it's true. Young people were a big part of the establishment of the church. But what I love about this book right here, Lessons from Battle Creek, is that it points out that our church has been phenomenal in intergenerational ministry from the very beginning. We had older folks mentoring the younger folks. We had James and Ellen White being mentored by older folks and leading in that initiative. So if there was ever a church that was intergenerational, not just youth and not just old folks, intergenerational in its inception, it's the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So
back to what we see today.
What's that?
Is that what we see today?
We need to see more of it, but I do think in many fields we actually do, but we could do better at this very area.
Kevin, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I do agree with Gary. I think if you look at the history of our church, we were aggressively intergenerational, and yeah, I do also agree with Gary when he said that we need to see more of it. Absolutely, a lot more of it, as if we were to sustain ourselves as a movement. And one way to do that is for people in leadership and people at least in church to answer questions that young people are really asking, because I think there's a tendency to deeply further entrench the church's relevance if we were to keep answering questions that a lot of people are not asking. And so young people today, they are asking questions that pertain to the civil unrest right now, and here in the West, in America. They're asking questions pertaining to global warming. They're asking questions pertaining to human relationality. And the more, I think one way to build that intergenerational trust that Gary's talking about is to now provide thoughtful, consistent, and careful, I would say, responses to some of these deep questions. And also to be honest, if you didn't know about anything, if you didn't know about certain things, to be like, I'm not really sure about this. I'm not quite sure about how we can answer this. And here's the thing: Adventism as a worldview offers this consistent ethical framework within which one can meaningfully engage social issues. We need to tap into the social engagement that flows from, not in spite of, but flows from our theological beliefs. In other words, like our pioneers. And to give you an example, right now here in America, many young people, especially from my conversations, they see Christianity as synonymous with civil religion, and they don't want anything to do with it, or a nationalistic religion. And Adventism, I think, for example, is perfectly designed as a theological system and a prophetic movement to address some of these concerns, in a way that all people may see all of their affiliations and all of their identifiers as something that can be used by God to be redemptive to the communities around them. And so, so that's one way in which we can really maybe make this intergenerational connection better and build trust between the generations.
Amen.
Okay, let's switch a little bit. Tell me about your families. Kevin, are you married? Do you have children? Tell me more about your family.
Yeah, I'm married to one wife, and a beautiful wife, and we've been married for about 3 years now. So yeah, no kids, but that's something in the future.
Wow, cool. When did you become an Adventist?
Yeah, like I said earlier, like I was born into an Adventist home, but I did not. I can trace my agency and the decision to choose to be an Adventist, I would say, when I was maybe 18 or 19 years old. Yeah.
What happened? How did you make that, I don't know, did you fall in love with Jesus and say, this is it, I'm giving my life, I'm doing this? Or was it, you mentioned you were in the first year of theology and you had to grapple with some of this. Is that what you're referring to? And what happened? What was some of the thought patterns there? You mentioned it briefly. Let's go a little bit deeper.
Okay. Yeah. So I am mentioning that time period where I actually gave up my faith, because you see, till I was about 19 years old, I was an Adventist because my parents were Adventists, and I was holding on to their faith. And once I left my home, my family, and I came to the States, that separation was very, very difficult and very traumatic to me, and probably one of the hardest times of my life when I moved to the States, that first year. And when I didn't have my parents close to me, I felt far away from God, because that's kind of how I understood my faith.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason I gave up on my faith and Adventism was because I had a lot of these questions, and that's why I was mentioning what I mentioned earlier. I had a lot of these existential questions that I couldn't find answers to, and it came to a point where I just couldn't sustain. I realized that my belief system couldn't sustain some of these questions, and so I took at least at the time, the quote unquote the easy way out. By just saying, what, I don't think anything matters. Let me just kind of let go of everything. And I'm not saying that to suggest that everybody who has done that is taking the easy way out. This was by no means easy for me at the time. But what got me back into faith were a couple of things. Number one, it was the haunting memories of my father praying for me every day. So I grew up in as a kid. My father, I would always see my father praying in the morning every day, rain or shine. And I also saw the life change that had happened with him. He had struggled with certain things, and I was able to see God working in his life, and so those memories kept haunting me. It's like, what if God worked in that man's life? I think he can work in mine too, or anybody's for that matter. So that memories were haunting me in the back of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that happened was the consistency and the care of two of my friends in college. I told them, and those are the first people I told them. I told them, hey, I don't think I'm Adventist anymore, bro. Like, I don't think I'm going to be a Christian anymore. But these guys, they were willing to embrace me, my person, without compromising their own spirituality. They were willing to say, hey, you can still hang out with us. We're still friends. Let's go. So the care and consistency of my friends really caused me to revisit my aversion to theology and spirituality in general. And I saw God in them. The last thing was, I wanted to really find out, okay, did Jesus really raise from the dead? Like, I wanted to approach that from a purely apologetic perspective. I wanted to find out, do we have enough credible reasons and evidence to say that, hey, this guy really rose from the dead? And so I badgered my theology professors. I went online, I scored the internet, I read books, and came to a point where I found more reasons to suggest reasons to support the believability of the resurrection rather than to dismiss it. And so I just told Jesus, hey, there are so many questions that I don't know. There's still a lot of uncertainty regarding a lot of different things, but I know that. But I believe that you rose from the dead, and if you rose from the dead, Jesus, I'll walk with you, and everything else will make sense. And so that was my journey, and so that's what happened to me.
That's incredible. I've just been reading a book, Jesus Among Secular Gods. Ravi wrote it, and he mentions how solid the Christian faith is to withstand questioning, and the questioning is welcomed, especially in regards to the resurrection, because what you went through is very similar, I believe, to what the early Christians went through, where the question was, did this guy really raise from the dead? Well, there were 500 witnesses. You can ask them, says the Bible. And so no one that even accused Jesus could question the resurrection. There was no question whether he had or not, which is very telling. So, I think it's N.T. Wright that points out that, and he's a first century historian, great writer. He says, there's more evidence for the resurrection than for the first Caesar. And when you compare the resurrection, a historical fact, compared to the other things that we consider historical fact, there's much more evidence for the resurrection. So it was a very intellectual ascent, Kevin, that led you to make a decision to stay with Jesus and say, I'm going to dedicate my life to this.
Now, the flip side of that whole conversion experience was that I didn't know how much that experience would be crucial to my pastoral ministry today. Because right now, there are, whenever I engage somebody who says that they're agnostic or they're atheist or they are whatever, my knee-jerk reaction is not, I need to convert you. I need to now tell you the truth. I need to now, share the gospel with you right now. My knee-jerk reaction is, tell me more about that. Because you see, you never know what people are going through and the stories and the pasts that they've endured. And when I've taken that approach and I've as opposed to, okay, I'm going to give you the whole thing right now, the whole shebang, here's it,
Get ready.
It's going to mess them up even more. We don't do that with education. We don't do that with kindergartners as they're starting school.
Jesus didn't do that.
Jesus didn't do that as well. And so that's probably, again, another way in which, coming back to our conversation about the young people, whenever a young person tells the pastoral team or the leadership, I don't believe in Jesus anymore, I don't believe in God anymore, what if, instead of saying, oh, you know what, I don't think that we don't need to go there anymore, what if we were prayerful and careful and we were willing to understand or go through what made them get there, and how what is their story, what's the story that led up to this person to decide all of that stuff. We might not necessarily get them to maybe follow Jesus. If that happens, praise the Lord, hallelujah. But at least a trust is built between that person and you that can even transcend church or denominational boundaries. And so that's what we need to aim for if you want to really kind of hone in on these intergenerational relationships with our generations today.
Let me ask a couple of questions there, or rather make a couple of comments. I believe that we need to review our own hearts when it comes to others belonging or not. I'll give you an example. The church manual, going back to Gary, there are no standards for fellowship. So in the Adventist church, no Adventist pastor can remove somebody from a worship service or from a lunch or from whatever other public activities the church holds because of their beliefs or behaviors or so on. Unless they are disruptive, obviously you would find a really strong deacon that will help you if they are disruptive. I've seen my fair share of drunkards walking into the church, and it's very disruptive, and you cannot allow it. Sure. But no other issues. And so that knee-jerk reaction of you no longer belong to our fellowship if you don't believe anymore. Well, that's not biblical. It's not the way of Jesus. It's not in the manual. Just look at the disciples. John was what we would call very much a racist today. John, whilst following Jesus for a while, wondered whether genocide was the solution to the Samaritans. Let's call fire from heaven and burn them because they rejected us. That was John's solution. And what does Jesus say? Well, nothing. Jesus just lives with him and he has patience with him. Judas stayed with him to the last moment. So Jesus was very patient with his own. How does the story of John end? He was the youngest disciple. He was alive still at the end of the century. And the same John was saying to his church, who was made of Gentiles, worse than the Samaritans, dearly beloved children, love one another. So there is a transformation process that happens. And if God is patient, we should be. Now, I've also noticed the negative effects of appearing as if you don't care when a young person or somebody comes with the new decision to leave. So let me explain that. Somebody comes, and every pastor experiences this at some point, young, maybe a teenager, maybe in their early 20s or even 30s. Pastor, I'm done. I don't believe in this anymore. I've been listening to some videos. I've been reading some books, and I don't believe that Christianity is true. and I'm now an atheist. So I have heard of stories of pastors who simply reply, "Congratulations for your decision. You are now thinking for yourself." And it's as if it doesn't matter. So the young person goes off and so on. And when I got to talk to them, two examples, when I got to talk to them, I said, okay, well, let me tell you something. The end of the story, the decision you're making now matters, and it matters a great deal. If you don't believe in God, that's fine. But if you're wrong, there are consequences. So make sure that you have weighed the evidence. Make sure that you have asked the right questions. Make sure that you have gone through it properly. So because this matters, it matters a great deal. Let's go for lunch. So the relationship is not defined by a different belief, which is what you mentioned, Kevin. Let's allow that your friends continue to hang out with you, even though you did not believe the same as they did anymore. But it still mattered. Your father's prayers showed that it still mattered. So you had to do the hard work, the hard intellectual work of processing this. Now, of course, there is a work of the heart too, but that's something that is important. Gary, what about you? Did you grow up in the church?
Yeah, I was very fortunate enough since I was 2 years old to have parents that were strong Seventh-day Adventists who also had a deep love for Jesus, and they communicated that to me as a child. Some of my best memories, Kevin and Sam, were sitting with my head on my mom's shoulder as she read through the Uncle Dan and Aunt Sue series, or Uncle Arthur's bedtime stories, and we listened to Uncle Dan and Aunt Sue. They infused in my heart a real love for Christ, much in the same way of Kevin. I think sounds like Kevin also had parents that were strong in the Lord. Is that right, Kevin? Did I hear that right? Mm-hmm. And I was going to say, for our topic of retention, there's a key point right there. The fidelity of parents that the most influential person in a young person's life is their parents, not the youth pastor or whatever else. And that's one thing that both Kevin and I seem to have had. We had godly parents. So we knew about our Father's house. We knew where to go back to. So that when we went through a crisis of faith, and I went through my own crisis of faith as a pastor, it's a very scary time in my life to stand in the podium and have some serious doubts. I had been reading some material. I won't tell you what it was, but it just threw me for an amazing loop. All my life, I had been surrounded by people who had strong faith, and my parents loved the Lord. And then I started reading this material, and I had never dealt with this information before. This is why around the world, I've been challenging pastors and teachers to please teach your young people the science of creation, help them to understand scientifically their belief, not just the biblical understanding, but teach them to be able to deconstruct evolution through science, so that when they get into these secular universities and they find themselves dealing with a militant atheist professor, they're able to stand strong for their faith because they learned this. I never had that. So when I faced this stuff for the first time, it crumbled me, and I had to build myself up. But the difference is I knew about my Father's house because of my parents and their love for Jesus, and they had taught me about the Lord. So in my journey of building my faith and finding my way out of this situation, I knew about a God who loved me. I knew about his care for me, and I walked with him through that process. So, I would say number one thing in retaining young people, parents, if you're listening right now, is your fidelity to God. Those times that you spend with your young person with their head on your shoulder, reading the Bible to them. Those times where you're modeling Christianity. Those times when you don't want to go to church, but you get in the car and you bring your young person, your child, to church. Those times when you don't want to volunteer for stuff at church because you got a million stuff on your plate and you're exhausted, but you bring your child because he's involved in the process or she's involved in something. I got to tell you, parents are the key to retention. Not the youth pastor, even though he's a big deal. Don't get me wrong, important. It's the parents.
Yeah, as youth pastors in inner cities, you have to, and perhaps we'll end with this question and see where it goes. There are a lot of broken families, right? Especially in the inner cities. Generally single moms. Every now and again you have a single dad, but mostly single mothers. And now you have teens whose fathers may be present in their life, maybe not. And then you have the figure of the youth pastor and the pastor. And how do you help families that are broken so that the image of God is not distorted more than it needs to be? Because I think every father, every parent distorts the image of God in many different ways, but some are worse than others. So how do you care for people in communities who don't have, mom and dad who are role models?
Can I just say, just real quickly, Kevin said something that really stuck with me. He said that the one phrase that he uses with young people and people that are struggling is, tell me more. I thought that was powerful because, yeah, they don't know about their father's house. Maybe they haven't had a family that's been close to God and they don't have that special blessing. But when you ask them a simple question like that, man, what a chance for you to show a father's heart, a mother's heart toward a young person by listening to them and building trust with them. Tell me more. I'll never forget that, Kevin. I think that's super valuable because that will then open up the door for you to introduce them to their father's house at the right time. I love it, man. Anyway, that was my thoughts on Kevin's comment.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thank you, Gary. It's I'm all ears for those of you, both of you have had like a lot more experience than I have in pastoral ministry here. I'm also trying to figure out what this looks like from our own pastoral context here. But from time to time, and like at least from our community, we have imagined like what would our church look like if we were we would function as a community center, in our community, where it's not just a real estate taking space, but a place where we can open opportunities for single moms and for dads, for people with broken homes. I mean, to come and to give our love and support tangibly. Our church in Oceanside, we actually have a school, and school that was funded entirely by our church. It's Oceanside Elementary School, and so we've had the school running for the last 20, 25 years, and yeah, it's purely made possible by the generosity of the members and from community. And so we have in our school that if we have members in our community that unfortunately they are not able to support their kids through the private school or any other school that they want to, we try to make opportunities and create spaces for them to join our school so that the school actually connects the community with the church. And so and again, going back to young people, when young people see that now the church is now engaged in the community, when they see that we are now engaged in real life issues, we're not just praying, but it's prayerful action. And they see the prayerful action, they're like, oh, you know what? That's amazing. Because a lot of people, a lot of the kids these days, they tend to care more about someone's ethics rather than their creeds. They want to see, okay, how are you actually practicing the things that you are saying that you believe? And so when they see these opportunities, they're able to now get back to the church. And so, yeah, broken families, I think the church should step into that, and the pastor should see themselves, the ministry leaders should see themselves as agents of love, and helping the families connect to each other.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching this from home, obviously, well, actually, you may not be at home. You may be driving somewhere, in which case you should just be listening. Turn off the video. Thank you for joining us in A&N in Depth. Kevin, thank you for your generosity with your time. Keep making decaf chai latte.
Amen.
What is it now? I wanted to mention it because you have this really cool sentence. You need to boil the milk until it sings, right?
Stir till you see the color of a happy brown boy.
That's the one. Yeah. When do you stop stir? Well, when you see the color of a happy brown boy. That's a great sentence there. Thank you for joining us today, Gay. You've got Zoom meetings all day long, so thank you for joining us in this record. Please find both of these gentlemen on social media, engage with them, learn from them. Thank you for joining A&N in Depth. Subscribe to the channel. If you haven't clicked the little bell yet, do so you're notified next week when the next video comes out. And that's about it for today. Let's have a word of prayer. Gary, why don't you pray for us?
I'd be honored. Thank you, Father, so much for this chance to meet with Sam and Kevin and with all of our listeners and watchers right now. we hope that, God, something that we've said will be encouraging to those who have listened and watched, that they will be blessed and strengthened in their walk with you. God, we lift up all of our parents and youth leaders and youth advocates around the world who love young people, who are urgently asking you, Lord, what would you have us do? And I know, God, that you will show them exactly what they need to do to reach and retain the younger generation as they ask you. You are the chief shepherd, and you said that you love children, Lord. Suffer the little children to come to me and forbid them not, for such is the kingdom of heaven. We love you, Jesus. Thank you for Kevin, and thank you for Sam. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks, guys. I will see you next week.